President Kagame, thank you so much for joining us for a new edition of the Global Security Forum in Doha. Thanks for agreeing to speak with me. I find it kind of ironic because I think in all of my interviews with you, and there have been numerous, I've never worn a tie. And this morning I said, I really ought to wear a tie. And you didn't wear a tie, so I'm going to take my tie off.
Yes, please.
And just do that. But it's great to
Let's
see you
relax.
again.
Let's relax.
Exactly. Hey, well, I want to start. We're at a significant security conference, and security can mean many, many different things and different fronts. It can be global security, national security, regional security. It's also domestic security. And the worst kind of domestic security collapse is what Rwanda experienced now over 30 years ago in the genocide against the Tutsis. And you've just gone through the commemoration of 30 years of that. And I just want to start there. And I really regret not being in Kigali for that. You invited me and I was unable to be there. But I wanted to ask how your nation feels after that horrible incident. What, as a nation, have you learned? What are the strengths and what are your ongoing challenges 30 years after one of the world's worst genocides?
Yeah. Right. The way we feel today, the population and everybody is like the tragedy is behind us. It's left behind many 3 decades, really. But it never gets that distant in the past. Some traces of it we live with. We have to live with maybe for more decades ahead. But what we chose to do in our case was not to be held behind by this tragedy, the immense burden everyone carries from that, because we're also thinking about how do we live our future, a future that is much better than the past. So that's why there is that feeling that of creating a normal life and living a normal life and everyone going ahead as much as we can. So that is the feeling.
One of the things that was in my mind when I visited Rwanda the year before last is I went to one of the camps that does reconciliation work and basically really tries to reprogram folks that had been formerly in Rwanda, who had been there, had escaped, had become part of forces that have been attacking Rwanda, etc. But those that had been previously aligned with the genocidal regime before, you take these people back, and I saw and met many of them that had gone through this experience. So that's one vision I had. The other vision I know of is that recently there was a mass grave found in the Huye district of about 1,000 people killed in '94 that weren't previously known in a grave. And I just want to put on the table that must be very, very hard for people to both be reconciling with those abroad. And there's also you've had 30-year prison sentences in many cases for those. That many of those people are coming out of jail. How is that going inside of the grit of society that still is discovering atrocities from the past?
The society has been healing, and I think it's, in my view, something we didn't even expect that it would go this fast. And we've been working together. We've tried to bring the country back together. That has been, the country has been divided so badly, people made to hate each other, and that's the life. That is the life and the politics they got used to. But now it is the reverse of that, meaning we've tried to build unity, and it is happening. You can see it's something that is also benefiting from the young generation, the young people who constitute, that is 35 and below years old, are 73% of our population.
Right.
So but of course, these incidents keep reminding everyone that, yes, there is that ugly past we've gone through. We can't take anything for granted. We have to make sure that this division to the extreme that led to the genocide, as we had it in 1994, this should never happen again. We can't allow it. And, so that is what primes everyone to look at what needs to be done in terms of unity, in terms of socio-economic progress that will really erase slowly. It is a slow
Right.
process, but it will erase the.
But it may be slow, but I mean, in 30 years, it's remarkable. Your society, your nation almost disintegrated. And, now I'm reading about Qatar Airways investing in Rwanda Air, a new airport in Kigali coming in 2027. When I was at the gorilla naming ceremony before, I met one of the co-founders of BioNTech. I mean, you're bringing in people, investment, and looking at future infrastructure in a country that almost disintegrated 30 years. So let me just transition here and ask you, what is the Paul Kagame roadmap for the Rwanda development, given the fact that I've seen, biotech top people in the world in the country. I've seen, the CEO of Qatar Airways talking to me about how important Rwanda could be as a hub within Africa travel. So I'd just like you to give us this kind of a around the corner look of your plan of the infrastructure you're bringing in for the country. And, infrastructure sometimes is not just planes and facilities, it's also people. How are you investing in people?
Yeah, the foundation in this case for us is unity, and we are building on that foundation by investing in people. When we invest in human capital, when we provide the goods for education and health and food security and bring in technology and therefore go into these other industries that will make our economy, our country vibrant and grow and develop, like the service industry, like hospitality, and industries like you've just mentioned, biotech, industries in mining, because Rwanda has resources and we need to change the understanding, the mentality, because Rwanda, like many other African countries with the enormous wealth, actually more countries in Africa have more wealth than Rwanda has, but we do have. Just exporting raw materials and not processing, not adding value to anything, we have reversed that, and everyone knows the benefits of doing that.
So you've moved from being in the bottom of the value chain up that ladder.
Absolutely, that is the main focus. Even when you just mentioned the Qatar Airways and having invested together with the Qatar in a modern airport and other kinds of infrastructure, digital infrastructure that we are promoting. All these are to add value to any process, anything we have in our economy, and therefore rising in levels of the value chain, as you said.
So, Mr. President, let me ask you a question, and I may get this wrong, and I know it's a sensitive subject, but a lot of your neighbors have been suffering through a kind of post-colonial phases. We've seen a lot of instability, particularly in former French controlled colony areas of coups and whatnot. And that's one part of the story. The other part of the story, and I have to admit, the United States and China often talk about Africa as if it's a competitive zone for their interests. My experience with you and Rwanda is you're not allowing that story to be told there, that you're looking at different. So I'm interested in what is the secret sauce of how you're not allowing Rwanda to be recolonized by technology, by biotech firms, by foreign players, and that you reject this notion, I think, that you're just a function of American and Chinese and Russian competition.
Well, we have learned a lot of lessons, and the world there has, and Africa should have learned as many lessons as we have. But the question is, we need to show that we have learned lessons. We can't repeat the same mistakes of the past and expect to be better going forward as we all want. So for us, from the tragedy and from also understanding the politics, the global politics and the relationships and so on and so forth, we have made a choice. And to begin with, we work within the setting of the African continent. So when you talk about United States, China, maybe some other powers, you can say, put them together, Europe, and so on. I think lessons learned from Rwanda, here in Rwanda ourselves, but also similar to many other lessons that should have been learned across the continent. And we are seeing also US, China competition turning into increasingly adversarial sort of relationship. We don't think it is correct for Africa or for Rwanda to just be consumed by these two powers and crushed in between. I think it is important for Africa, for Rwanda, to have this kind of thinking that, no, we have something to do for ourselves. We have lives to live ourselves. We don't live for others, and others don't live for us. And in fact, if you look at Africa, currently about 20% of the global population. In about 25 years, Africa will be constituting 25% of the global population, and that growth involving a middle class, probably the only middle class in the world that will be growing. I mean, how can we waste this asset? And this is something terribly wrong with ourselves. And we shouldn't accept this. So Rwanda, working with other African countries on the continent, we think we can relate, be friends with others, United States, Europe, China, name it, and not be dragged into this kind of conflict that benefits those others who are conflicting among themselves and simply impoverishing more or less forever the African continent. So it's a hard task, it's a struggle, but nonetheless, it's the most noble thing we can do for ourselves.
You know, we have limited time today because I'd like to spend a lot more time on this, but I would, tell you it would be a great op-ed for you to write on how you welcome Chinese investment, American investment, European investment in, but you set boundaries and you set rules. It'd be interesting to see what that template looks like. Yes. Because many of us that are, talking about this one don't know about how do you say, okay, China, we welcome you, but these are the lines you're not going to cross. Same thing to Americans, same thing, to kind of reverse that issue about, your role. Because I think, to tell you the truth, the history of the African continent and interaction with a lot of other places in the world has been one of Africa being exploited. And so I think it's one of those interesting things that I need to turn around. But you have to put it in op-ed. But look, I want to get to another issue, basically, and that is how you look at security in the continent, and where you've deployed your own forces to help other nations that have requested troops. You've been very critical of UN peacekeeping missions having inchoate strategy, inchoate instructions. But you've got forces in Mozambique, forces in the Central African Republic. I'm interested in not just why you're there, but what forces need when they're deployed somewhere else to try to secure stability that you think you might be achieving in your own deployment of Rwandan military forces versus some of your criticism of UN style deployments in which Rwanda forces have also participated.
Yeah, it's again, if you look at what has been happening, I mean, there is a lot of evidence. People don't even have to, but you can do the audit. Other people can do the audit. You look at every part of the world where, let's say, the UN peacekeeping effort has been carried out, and still in some places still happening. You can see how much has been invested, the presence of numbers of peacekeepers, the amount of money spent, the equipment and everything, and then look at what has come out of that. One typical example I can give you, if you look at DRC, the Congo, our neighbor, we can talk about the problems that are between us and the whole region.
And we'll get there.
Later on. So over 20 years, maybe 23 now, so much invested in tens of billions. And then if you look at, so what did they get from that? Zero. But actually, even this, anyway, the problems continue as they were before. So why can't people just take a moment and reflect on this? Is this the best way to actually deliver peace that is needed in different places? Now, let's say with Mozambique, first, the most important thing is if the people of any country want support and need support, and everybody sees that they need support. Mozambique requested Rwanda to work with them, support them in fighting the religious radical insurgency that was happening in one province called Cabo Delgado, which is 3 times the size of my country, geographically. So we went there because they requested, and we've been doing a good job with our friends and partners in Mozambique. Mozambique also accepted others to come and help. That's a different issue. I will not talk about that. I'll talk about what concerns Rwanda. The place we deployed in, which is in that part of Cabo Delgado, which was mainly affected, we resolved the problem over the last 2 years and some months, maybe 80% or 85% of that, working with the locals, working with the Mozambicans. Having really 2 tasks. One was to actually deliver security using our own, even if you would say limited capacity, but it is effective on the ground. And working together with the Mozambicans, we were able to do that. And if you look at the cost of it, it's a very, small cost if compared to what has been with other peacekeeping operations that have been going on. Now, but even then, you can see that, as we were saying, lessons that are not learned even with time. The international community, which sometimes expresses support for Mozambique and this and that, do very little, in fact, to support this kind of thing, this model where Africans are getting together, working together to deliver the security that is required in different parts of the country. That is, whether we are talking about Mozambique or Central African Republic. I mean, you ask yourself, if what is needed, what people want is just the final product of delivering security, stability, so that, and in fact, these countries are countries with huge resources, and some of them have attracted investments from these developed countries. Instead of supporting that, they are not doing so. Well, they know if they even bring their model to work in there, bringing UN peacekeepers and so on and so forth. Well, they haven't done it, but even if they brought it, maybe it would be similar to what is happening in the DRC. So you wonder then, and this question keeps coming up anyway in everything, whether we learn lessons. And therefore, I don't think we do, because if we did, then we would be seeing what works actually working. But you find what works is not even encouraged to work. It is even undermined. In fact, some questions being asked in Mozambique, you see, but Rwanda in Mozambique, but they are also in Congo. And therefore, that stops. They think by not helping this operation in which Rwanda is heavily involved, they are punishing Rwanda. I don't know for what.
Right.
But actually, they are punishing Mozambique, not Rwanda, because that's where the problem is. So I don't understand the logic. I don't understand what.
So let me ask you a question about what you see as blind spots of the West when it thinks about security in Africa. So, when I think about it, you mentioned the DRC, and recently, I think about a week ago, our State Department said to your government and to you, you need to punish part of your own forces, which the United States assert cooperated with M23 in some attacks inside the DRC. And I don't want to get into a discussion of who did what to whom. Your government has denied that. I'm more interested in the question of what is the Paul Kagame plan if you were to talk to Blinken and to Sullivan, which I know you have done, say this is how, from your perspective, this needs to be fixed. But I'm interested in a more broad question as well. We've seen a lot of coups, Niger, Guinea, various places, in the region, and you've just recently traveled to some of these countries just in the past week. What are we getting wrong in understanding stability in Africa that you think the United States and Europe can, significantly improve on?
Well, to begin with, what I would do if I would be talking to these leaders in those countries, like United States and others, I would start by telling them that they can do much, much better than that. Because in the end, they are really doing nothing. Passing statements of condemnation and blaming this or that without addressing the problem, I think simply adds to the problem, not doesn't address it. So that's what I would start with telling them. And for every problem, there is a root cause. You simply look at the root cause of the problem and what the problem is, and work with the parties involved to address what needs to be addressed, in your sense, and reduce on the politics, on the interests, on this, on that. I mean, some of these things, they just don't go away unless you do what is necessary to be done that underlies the problem. I mean, it doesn't need a lot of capacity to think, or what all of us have can serve us to understand the issues like this. So that's what I would tell them. Now, if you extend it across the continent, the main failure on our continent and these other places where there is a failure of governance and security, both of them which are needed for any society to stabilize and function the way it should and the way the people would wish to see happen. So if you look at countries where coup d'etats have been happening, nobody wishes to see coup d'etats happen in any place. There's nothing to celebrate about that. But at the same time, you don't stop there. You just don't condemn coups without even trying to find out, basically, what is it that led to this point? What was it that was lacking for a coup to happen? This is when you start seeing signs of that in governance or lack of security, as we have seen mainly in some of these countries in West Africa. I mean, these are things that anyone can see. You don't need to dig deep to investigate. You can see it. In fact, you can see it before it has happened, and you can tell that something is going to happen in this place or the other. So why can't people, first on our own continent, the Africans ourselves, in fact, which, again, we have talked about that, the way within Africa, Africans can work together to address a problem like we did in Mozambique or in Central African Republic. But with even developed countries, support or involvement the right way, it would happen faster and more easily. So why doesn't it happen? They all concentrate now on condemning. By the way, it is funny, it is in fact ridiculous, because in some cases, they would condemn people in certain places where coups have happened and be quiet in similar cases.
Right.
Like you see, even the failure of governance, they attack countries, lack of democracy, lack of freedom, lack of human rights, lack of this. And where some of these are lacking the most, but because of the interests that people have in those countries, it will be muted. Effectively, nothing to be talked about that. So are we really addressing the problems the way they should be addressed, or we are just posturing and talking about, need for this and giving lectures and so on and so forth?
Let me try to squeeze in a couple of more quick questions before we go. One big one, I think, is, in our past discussions, I remember talking to you when you visited Washington for the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit. And at that time, you were beginning to think, about the broader U.S. Rwanda relationship. That relationship had some barriers in it, including Paul Rusesabagina being in prison. Your justice system commuted his sentence. A lot of progress has been made on the stumbling blocks in between Rwanda and the United States. But at the time when you were in Washington, you said, Washington kind of goes up and down. It has a tension and then it disappears. And you said it's very inconsistent. I'm interested in whether there's now a consistency of attention in the relationship between the Biden White House and the Biden State Department, over the importance of relations with you and Rwanda, or whether it is something that goes to sleep for a while and then awakens when there's a crisis or a problem. What is what's the terrain of that relationship?
I think you can take my previous statement when you were in Washington. It hasn't changed much. And when I answered that question I was also conscious that things don't change so easily anyway, in some cases, and with this one, it wasn't going to change. But, and for example, Rusesabagina should not have been a case to quarrel about between the United States and Rwanda anyway, to begin with.
Right.
But it happened. And we dealt with it because it was there to be dealt with. And we tried to do it the best way we could. We got it out of the way.
But even getting beyond that, you're not having, nirvana in U.S. Rwanda relations, is what I'm hearing.
No, not too much.
No nirvana. Let me just ask you really. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
You are going to sleep and waking up. This time there hasn't been waking up. It has been.
I'm sure that's going to be tweeted somewhere. And look, the other controversial thing you and I have discussed before is the UK's Illegal Migration Act. Rwanda hosts and brings into Rwanda as part of a relationship with the UK. Asylum seekers come in, and Rwanda has been designated as a safe place and harbor by UK courts. And that's controversial with a lot of people. It's controversial in some, with a judge in Northern Ireland, et cetera. You and I have talked about the environment, the jobs, et cetera, that you're trying to do for these employees. What's interesting to me is that a poll inside the EU has recently said that more than half of EU member states want the same deal with Rwanda, would like to have that kind of relationship. And, it's a complicated subject because asylum and dealing with people that are running away from whatever trauma or circumstance in their life there. But I'd love to get your thoughts on that. And the fact is that despite the controversy that some attach to this practice of moving folks to Rwanda, which I imagine is both economic development, but it's something you're thinking about with regards to population growth. But the fact that a lot of other nations in the EU want it, what are your thoughts about that? Do you want to expand the program?
Yeah. Putting the controversy aside, we in Rwanda, we insist on trying to do things the best way we can. And there will be people who criticize, there are others who will appreciate what it is for the fact of it. So we chose to be consistent in our way of trying to do things. One, the fact that there have been debates about whether Rwanda is safe, but in the end, it is what it is. You know it, Steve. UK knows it, Europe knows it, US knows it. Rwanda is actually safe. So being safe does not depend on whether somebody likes us or not. It is a good we have provided to ourselves and to our country, and it exists. So let's put it aside. The other thing, what is lacking is the level of development that takes care of our people the way we want, or that would take care of other people who come here, whether they are migrants or whatever, and wherever they come from, to also be taken care of the way they want or we want. That's another thing on the side. So the issue of migration and how we dealt with it started way beyond UK. In fact, even now, today, we are processing migrants who were stuck in Libya, who were trying to cross into Europe and got stuck there, or others were dying in the Mediterranean. And we provided that safe haven for people to come here or be processed through here to wherever they wanted to go in 2018. It's not a recent thing. And that time, we had no agreement with anyone, so there wasn't even anyone going to pay for it except ourselves. The people worked for these migration institutions, international institutions, or UNHCR, and so on and so forth. So since 2018, hundreds of thousands of people have been brought by air from Libya to Rwanda. This is what UK, I think, noticed, that there was another way of dealing with this problem, which had turned into a huge problem for them as
Right.
it is for the whole of Europe.
Right.
So they asked us if that could be expanded to deal with such a problem as they have it. And we accepted, because we have had a good relationship before with the
Right.
UK. In terms of our development, they have been supporting our development for many years and so on and so forth. So our people discussed, but then we had to discuss it. How do we do it the best way so that we don't cause any injury to anybody in the process, but solve the problem for United States, for UK, for migrants, and for ourselves. So UK provided, because we told them, for example, that we cannot bring people here because of our limited means. We're not going to be able to look after them effectively as you've been looking after them in your own country, except now for relocation. So that's how this development component on this part of the agreement came about. But anyway, support for our development was going on even before. Doing this. So now we are looking at, so the debates that are going on in the UK or in Europe or wherever about whether Rwanda is safe, for us, it is immaterial. We understand who we are, we know what we have here, we know we can provide the security to anyone, governance, and so what we lack is different. It is the means to apply to it for development of these people. So when people are there debating, is Rwanda safe, is it that? Well, that becomes politics.
Well, it's very popular with a lot of other EU states. Look, I'm getting the signal that we need to bring this to conclusion. I can talk, as you know, for hours with you on these issues, and really grateful for your time. I want to talk about sports and what you've done with sports as economic development and your sports diplomacy in Guinea and Senegal. There are a lot of things that we've got to leave for the next discussion we have, but I really want to thank you for joining the Global Security Forum. I'm excited to see the airport in 2027, and I want to go to a future gorilla naming ceremony, and I'll leave to the audience to figure all that out. But Paul Kagame, thank you so much. Great to be with you again.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much. Hope to see you next time.